Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm just here to give you a couple of housekeeping items. Everyone is on mute, so if you have any questions, please post them in the chat box. The webinar recording will be sent out to all registrants and also uploaded on the NASCIO Resource Center after the webinar. And Alan, I think we are ready.
Terrific, Danielle, and thank you. This is Alan Shark. I'm the Executive Director of the Public Technology Institute, and I'd like to welcome you into the webinar, Technology Forecast 2018, What State and Local Technology Officials Can Expect. Today, Doug Robinson, Executive Director of NASCIO, and I will paint a picture of what the technology landscape will look like for state and local governments for this year. This webinar has become an annual event and very popular. I think this is probably our 10th year, and I'm very excited to report that we have over 500 people that have pre-registered for this webinar. I should also add, this has become a fun event for Doug and I, and sometimes people refer to it as a Doug and Alan show, kind of fun. NASCIO and PTI have a close and successful working relationship, and we both enjoy sharing the ins and outs, the trends, and the opportunities that we see in the state and government technology community. Now, this year is a little different. Doug and I are very pleased to introduce the National Academy of Public Administration, who is joining as a webinar co-host. Both Doug and I serve on the Academy Standing Panel on Technology Leadership, and we look forward to working with NAPA on future programs. So thank you, NAPA, and for those of you who are joining us. I know that all of you are eager to get into the content of today's webinar, so I'll keep my opening very brief. Doug will first present the State Technology View, and then I will follow with the PTI Local Government Technology View. After that, we have set aside time for questions and answers. This webinar, of course, is being recorded, as Danielle said, and a link to the recording will be provided to all attendees within 24 hours. With that, I'd like to turn the webinar over to Doug Robinson, Executive Director of NASCIO. Doug?
Alan and our members, thank you very much for our attendees, and appreciate your taking time this afternoon to listen to our thoughts on what you can expect in 2018. Alan and I always enjoy putting this together. We've been doing it for many years, and I think we've been getting a very, very strong response to this. So as Alan said, I'm going to cover the state of the states and provide you some trends and perspectives from NASCIO's viewpoint and that of the state CIOs. And we're going to look at a number of things, particularly a focus on our state CIO priorities, which we produce every year and released in November of 2017 for the 18 calendar year. So let me start by giving a quick overview of the current state government landscape and the focus on some of the dimensions of information technology. I think particularly for states, as we've heard from our friends at the National Association of State Budget Officers, the FY18 budget cycles remain pretty cautious. They're going to be very conservative. The enacted budgets already are at about 2.3%, which again is historically low. Spending is going to be relatively flat with maybe slight increases in FY18 and 19. And still to be determined is what's going to be impact from federal tax reform. There's going to be a new word in everybody's vocabulary called conformity, and we're going to have to get used to that in terms of the state and local tax situation and how it's going to conform with the federal tax reform that's already passed. So what we'd expect in 18 is again improving structural budget balances, which have been a little bit rocky the last few years. But I think in terms of good news for the state IT community is continued focus on efficiency efforts and reorganization and consolidation of services. And that's kind of right in the wheelhouse of what many CIOs are doing, as some of you know. So I think there will be opportunities out there, particularly for possibly non-recurring cash investments, capital investments on infrastructure. And I think overall, though, the cautious is the word in terms of the next couple of years. So that helps CIOs in terms of that continued pressure to find cost savings and consolidation, and we'll talk more about that. That certainly includes growing investments in cloud, and we'll spend a couple minutes talking about cybersecurity and its increasing business risks in the states and what we're finding in that space. Again, another operative word continues to be enterprise. Enterprise solutions delivered by the state CI organization to state government agencies and many others, including local governments. And of course, for those in state and local government in the public safety and communication space, the first responders know that all the states and territories are now fully in on FirstNet. Implementation is underway, and you'll hear much more about that in 2018 with the FirstNet rollout for the public safety broadband communications environment. And again, a couple of key aspects of that to look forward to are the building apps ecosystem for those first responders in this new kind of broadband capability and data streaming for first responders, and then of course how they're going to deal with identity and access management, authorization. So we're involved in that. And I think finally from the NASCIO perspective, we always talk about the leadership. We will expect to see in 2018 a fairly significant turnover in the state CI leadership because there are 36 governors that are up for election, and many of them, more than half of those, are term limited or ending their terms in 2018. So this time next year we will have again a large number of new state CIOs. We've already had 18 in the last year, 15 in 2017, and 3 transitions already in January. So I think again that gives you the overall focus, and we're going to now kind of move to the top 10 priorities of CIOs, and I'm going to pick out a few of these for the rest of my presentation to give you an update and perspective on some of these priorities. For the 2018 forecast, again, this is ballots by all of our state CIOs, where we ask them to look at what their priorities are going to be from a strategic and from a management standpoint for 18. Cybersecurity #1 again for the 5th straight year. Again, not a surprise to anyone. Again, many of the topics and issues on the top 10 list are continuing and have been on that list for a number of years. A couple of surprises though for 18. One is how close cloud services is now to #1. It's moved up. It's been on the list since 2009, and it's getting a lot more attention from the state CIOs in terms of their need for enterprise services, software as a service, looking for outsourced capabilities in public cloud. So you're going to see that continue to grow. In digital government, for the first time, it's on the list, and I noted during our live poll before the event today that digital government actually came in at number 2 in terms of the percent of votes as being the attendees' priority. #1 was security at 30%, and then digital government close at 26%. So again, it shows I think the traction that digital government is getting as states try to position themselves to be more like marketplace opportunities in the private sector with their online services and broader portfolio. So again, many of these priorities have been on the list for a number of years, but again, digital government appears for the first time. Shared services comes back on the list, as does broadband. Agile moves down a little bit. Data management stays where it was in 2017. So again, this is probably the most important slide to look at from my presentation, is just knowing what those priorities are for the CIOs for the upcoming year. As I mentioned, cybersecurity continues to be the #1 priority for state CIOs, and so in our national surveys, we often ask positioning of the states in terms of their maturity. We want to characterize their current status, so I'll provide you some data from our 17 state CIO survey released in October, in late fall of 17. And as you can see from our longitudinal data over the past few years, cybersecurity maturity is certainly improving. We've seen higher adoption of frameworks and strategic plans, enterprise visibility, continuous monitoring, and so we ask a series of questions to kind of take the pulse of where states are. We know from this data and from other work we're doing, we're seeing, again, adoption of the NIST cybersecurity framework or others that relate to a risk-based strategies, and they're being adopted across the enterprise, and we would expect to see continued progress, particularly in a couple of areas. One is documenting the effectiveness through metrics. We're going to see more of those cybersecurity programs that have targeted metrics, and they're looking to close the gap to where we see that today. Developing a cybersecurity disruption response plan, I think, certainly in response to a lot of the ransomware and hacktivism events that we're seeing. States need to know they need to go beyond simply incident response to go to broad kind of whole of state cyber disruption, particularly if they had some kind of critical infrastructure cyber attack, which would disable utilities and other critical aspects of delivery from state government. They need to have a broader plan, and we're actually seeing a number of states that have already delivered those in the last couple of years. And then finally, you see 38% have obtained cyber insurance. That has actually already increased since we collected this data, and we're going to see more and more states move on to get cybersecurity insurance. In terms of governance, I thought I'd provide you with a perspective from the CIOs and their current role in the organization across cyber. So if you look at this, I think you see, again, some pretty predominant roles in terms of leading the organization in terms of the executive branch of state government. So I think from this and from what we're seeing in terms of executive orders and most recent legislation is that we expect certainly in 18 in the near future an increased centralization of cybersecurity within the states. And we hear that from our state chief information security officers. They need more enterprise visibility, so you're going to see more enterprise governance, more policy setting, more operational activities, more central network security operations center being established by the CIO, and again, I think that is just to get stronger authority over the infrastructure and the employees that they have responsibility for in terms of reducing that business risk. So we can expect to see more of that. Let me dig down a little bit into some really key aspects and findings from our 2017 State CIO survey, where we asked some forecast questions. We asked leading indicator questions in a number of areas, and so I really want you to take a look at the new engine. Again, all of the material that I'm talking about today and I'll reference is all available freely on the NASCIO website at nascio.org. So all of the reports and the details you can certainly dig into. So several key findings and ones that we continue to track. One is certainly about the devolution of the owner-operator model in state government for CIO organizations. And by that I mean for long-standing, for 4 decades, the CIO organizations and other agency IT leadership have basically owned and operated and delivered IT services from their infrastructure, and that clearly has declined and will continue to decline, and we'll see more brokering and more outsourcing and more use of managed services. So I think if you look at the 17 over 16 data that's presented to you, that you'll see some fairly nominal increases. So it's kind of steady state, flat in a couple of areas. I think 2 I would highlight to you is 1, expanded outsourcing, 28 to 55%. And again, introduce outsourcing as a new model. So we're going to see a couple of that, downsize the state-owned data centers. We've certainly seen that. We're not having any states that are building new data centers today. Most of them are they're downsizing or they're renovating and remediating their data centers. So I think that will continue to happen. I mean, I should note that all this data comes from the CIO's respondents, and you can see from some of the changes that we also have a number of new CIOs each year, so their perspectives change, but not the general trends around simply the owner-operator model moving more to a brokering service and much more of one using outsourced and managed services from our private sector providers. From our 2017 conference in Austin, Texas, I wanted to bring you one of our interactive questions, poll questions. Again, these are not scientific, but they do kind of trend to our more scientific surveys that we do nationally, and we asked the question about the business model, and you can see between on-premise and off-premise, 75% of those state government respondents indicated that they intend to move to a more centralized and enterprise model. And again, this introduces fairly dramatic change management. There is a resistance to change around this that we certainly see in the states, but that has not deterred many states to moving to a totally unified model of IT service delivery, integrated service delivery, both with both the infrastructure and the applications and the IT workforce, all under one state umbrella. And we're going to, I think, continue to see that move. And I think that's supported by the next set of data I'm going to present about the business models. And I think, again, if you go back to my earlier comments, introductory comments about the budget and cost efficiencies, that's what's driving the CIOs in terms of their future directive from the governor's office and their budget offices, and certainly those are the that the strategic and operational issues that are driving the increase in the CIO as broker model. And we're seeing, multi-sourcing initiatives. We're seeing that across a number of states. We have states today that are either have RFPs out or are evaluating proposals for multi-sourcing initiatives within their particular state. So again, cost effectiveness, flexibility. I think every state CIO aspires to have a modern IT organization, and they believe they can achieve that better if they have the capability to source strategically and not have to be the purveyor and the delivering of all of the infrastructure and all of the services, so they can be selective about that. So again, that's certainly a theme. Going to one of the other high priorities is around cloud, and you can see, again, a lot of data in our 2016 survey on cloud, so I really want to just point out one item, which is cloud migration off of legacy modernization. And as you can see, a significant number of states in that space, over 80% are looking at cloud migration. Either they have one in place, a little more than a quarter of the states, or they have one in development. So again, this is another common theme we're seeing across the states. And again, recognizing that cloud is and has been high on our state CIO priority list, but now is in the number 2 position, and for the first time, quite frankly, very, very close to security in terms of their number 1 priority. So I think we're going to continue to see investments in cloud, both private from the standpoint of the CIO organization and state agencies, and also publicly hosted cloud solutions, which state agencies always are looking for. And then finally, kind of in the cloud space and also in the everything as a service category, we have a new question and a new, I think, again, directional statement around the iconic mainframe. I think all state CIO organizations are known for hosting mainframe services. Many are all in a cost recovery or chargeback mode, delivering mainframe cycles to their state agencies. And some have, dozens, if not hundreds of applications on their mainframe currently, but we're also experiencing a significant decline in mainframe demand. So state CIOs are concerned about that last tenant model, about agencies abandoning the mainframe and moving to other capabilities. We see significant virtualization going on in the states. And in this category, I think something somewhat surprising is a question around mainframe as a service in an off-premise mode. So we already have 6 states that have moved their mainframe outside of their geographic confines. There's no mainframe in the state government complex or their data center. It's in an off-premise location sourced by a private sector provider. And I think we're going to continue to see that grow. It makes more cost-effective in the long term for the state because they're covering it as an operating expense. And initially, it may be more expensive to make that transition, but ultimately, they're not upgrading their mainframe hardware and platform on a cycle, and they're relying on their third-party provider to handle that and also deliver the services as those demands for mainframe services decline. So a couple of perspectives on our high priorities. Number 4 was digital government. Again, I saw that as in our online poll as a fairly number 2 vote getter. So that's interesting. I think particularly from the local government standpoint, you're going to get that perspective. I think there's, as we look at this, a significant amount of maturity that needs to take place in state government, although it has been moving, I think, quickly in the last couple of years with new opportunities and disciplines. As you can see, 45% of the states have this informally defined, and that obviously we'd expect that to grow. We are seeing states create digital services teams, and you can see that in the donut chart where we have a number of states that already have a digital services organization at 40%. We've seen states like Georgia who are working very diligently with the service portfolio and others that are expanding and having, again, enterprise class services that they're delivering to all agencies, going to enterprise portals, states that have actively created these organizations to work with their state government agencies and create uniformity, consistency, again, a common look and feel across all platforms. And then, again, enhanced digital government with chatbots and digital assistants, bringing artificial intelligence into the digital government experience, crowdsourcing, common services. And so I think that is particularly going to grow within the states, as well as something which would be expected from all states, and that is a fully mobile environment. And we're seeing a development of the mobile apps and then, of course, mobile websites that deliver these services. Agile is another item on the list that has been on the list the last couple of years in terms of Agile development, Agile IT service delivery. And you can see again from our data from our 17 survey, there's growing widespread use. We're going to see, I think, again, that continue to increase. We're going to see both individual agencies working on Agile IT service delivery at a broader level. Also, we're going to see more central oversight, more guidelines being published, more directives coming out on how Agile is to be used and how to be developed and what disciplines and frameworks should be applied across the state to, again, standardize that approach and provide some more consistency. And again, if you want more details about where we think Agile is going and our recommendations along with a playbook, you can look at the NASCIA website for our work that we did in 2017 with Accenture Consulting. And again, we developed a playbook for Agile, and again, a lot of good information based on surveys and interviews with Agile leadership across the states. We'd expect to deliver a national webinar on Agile with a couple of state government stories coming up here in the next month or two. So again, look forward to that. And then finally, let me talk a little bit about emerging technology. We did ask we definitely did ask a question early on in our live polling today about these types of emerging technologies. What's interesting is that in live polling, artificial intelligence from our respondents today came out much higher at about 56% of you all that voted on that poll today before the webinar, and IoT was at 26%. So again, we have a little bit different perspective from the state CIOs and probably some of the state agencies in terms of what's going to be the most impactful or disruptive over the next 3 to 5 years. IoT, continued growth in that area. Again, concerns around security, privacy, most importantly, I think for NASCIA, around data management, around the data, both retention and use around IoT devices. But we expect to see significant growth in the next year or two with artificial intelligence, particularly in areas like service portfolios for some of the delivery, cybersecurity using AI instead of people. With talent is very critical in the cybersecurity space, and got AI devices that can assist in that area. And certainly when you look at things like digital government, chatbots, we have states that are already using digital assistance to help, and we can expect that to grow. So that's a couple of our thoughts. Again, a number of reports, including one on blockchain, our playbook on moving digital government forward with a set of use cases around blockchain and state government. And I expect we're going to hear more about that with a number of states that have already begun pilot studies in blockchain. And then finally, a topic was barely off of the top 10 this year, but one that continues to be a major topic of discussion within the state community is around state IT workforce and some of the recommendations and innovations. We talk around here about the 4 R's for retirement, recruitment, retention, and reform around the state IT workforce. And so we asked a question, and I think in terms of going forward, what about personnel reform would be implemented in your state? And as you can see, modernizing IT job titles was at the top of the list, along with modernizing the office culture, the office environment, flexible work schedules. Those we're seeing many number of states that are starting to implement those or have implemented those. And then streamlining the hiring process. Certainly in terms of modernizing job titles, we have a number of states that have already undertaken those initiatives. Most recently, California, just about 2 weeks ago, the California HR organization delivered a ruling on classification for IT broadbanding, going from 36 different classifications down to 9, so they're collapsing those. And I think this is very important for a message to the marketplace, particularly for young talent that may not be interested in state IT service. They're certainly not going to be interested with job titles like Data Processing Specialist 2 and Computer Technician 1. These are not modern job titles, and they certainly don't have any meaning to the new workforce. So we're glad to see states moving in that direction. This is something I think that they all understand. And then finally, before I turn it over to Alan, let me wrap up. It's just some broad comments in terms of what we can continue to see in 2018. These are not in any order of priority. Certainly they just map along to many of the research that we've done in the last year, or that research that we are going to do, and the perspectives that we're going to get from state CIOs in 2018. Continued state IT transformations, consolidation, unification, States are moving to simplify their environment. They want to simplify IT, reduce the numbers of kinds. And so we're going to see an increased emphasis on enterprise architecture and policy around that. And again, continued growth of that integrated service delivery and kind of single IT organization. We've already had a number of legislative initiatives in 2017 that are going into effect in 18 for a number of states. More focus on enterprise cybersecurity, and by that I mean the centralization of cybersecurity, the overarching policy framework, more direction and oversight coming out of the State Chief Information Security Officer, hopefully more funding, more budgeting in that area. With the 2017, the record year for natural disasters in the U.S., the states and territories, and the renewed emphasis on disaster recovery, business continuity, we're going to see certainly more discussion about that. And citizen-centric digital government. We've heard a number of states that have either new initiatives or planning initiatives around enterprise identity and access management for citizen services. The one right door model with your single digital credential to do business across a multitude of state agencies with a common credential. Master service or master person index. A number of states working on those and looking at solutions for that from an architectural standpoint. I mentioned artificial intelligence. And I think we'll continue to see that not only in the states but in the public sector in general. We're also noticing, again, back to that first point about consolidation and simplification, and certainly a more hyper-converged infrastructure across the states. We're seeing significant investments of that. States are moving away from, again, duplicate services in terms of storage area networks and a lot of other appliances and integrating storage and servers into those hyper-converged infrastructure. And that obviously saves them cost and simplifies their environment. With the addition of continued chief officers, and for this I'm really talking about the chief data officers, the C-suite's going to continue to expand within state government. We now have 16 states with chief data officers, and again, 2018 we anticipate that expanding. And then finally, a couple of just kind of federal state policy discussions we've been having, and certainly you all have seen. One is more recent around net neutrality. And again, the FCC ruling abolishing the previous administration's net neutrality policy, and I think we're going to see state responses. And breaking news just this week, 2 state governors have issued executive orders requiring the states follow net neutrality for service provision within their state. So they're going to kind of roll that back, and again, this has become a very partisan and perhaps divisive issue. We're going to see more and more of that in the states. And I think finally, in line with our own federal advocacy for 18 for NASCIO, the continued debate vis-a-vis the state and federal oversight, preemptive action by the federal government over emerging technologies like drones and UAS, autonomous vehicles. We're going to, again, continue to see more discussion about that. And a number of states, a few already, a handful, I suspect we'll see more in 2018, states that will form statewide commissions or councils or study groups around autonomous and highly connected vehicles. And again, the particular interest here from the CIO community is around security, privacy, data collection and management and utilization. And so we expect to have, again, more conversation in the NASCIO community about autonomous and highly connected vehicles, even though it doesn't directly relate to the services that the state CIOs provision. So again, I certainly thank you for listening to our comments today from NASCIO on what we would expect. And let's go ahead and end now and turn this over to Alan, and Alan can cover what we expect to see in local governments. Alan, on to you.
Great. Thank you, Doug. Isn't it amazing? It wasn't too long ago we used a word that was not used in any of your slides or mine, e-government. And, with the E-Government Act of 2000, and look where we are today, digital services and the like. So I'm going to take a slightly different tact and then come exactly back to where Doug left us off in terms of identifying issues based on research. For the last 10 years, I have been looking at various sources of those with, digital crystal balls and those still with glass crystal balls and looking at the future. And so one of the things that I've done for the last 10 years is do the annual ins and outs. In some cases, some things make it from one year to the other, and often is the case. The priorities change as well as all the other things that we're talking about here. So when we deal with the ins and outs, cybersecurity has certainly evolved from being a concern to more or less a crisis, something that consumes every one of us. And you'll see when I get into the research that cybersecurity has been on the number one thing on CIOs' minds, regardless of locality, state, county, city. Perimeter-based security focus has given way to a more holistic active monitoring and response system approach to help us combat the bad guys that always seem to be one step ahead of us. The idea of hacked has kind of evolved and morphed into our fear of ransomware that continues to grow. And I'm starting to see, and this is good news, a number of jurisdictions fighting back by not paying. For the longest time, it was attractive to pay because the amount being asked for was, quote unquote, somewhat reasonable compared to what it might cost in time and money to reconstruct something. But now I think we're getting a handle on that and fighting back in a very positive way. GIS systems are ever more popular, especially when they're looked upon as interactive, visualized information systems, which is the perfect complement to big and open data. How do we visualize this is the new focus, and that continues. We move from touch to voice. We're talking to our televisions. We're talking to these devices. And who would have thought just 5 years ago that us so-called smart people would allow an open microphone tied to the internet to sit there listening to anything that we ask for almost any time of the day. And yet that's exactly what we're doing, asking for the weather and the like. And with these have different voices and different names, but that will continue because it's so darn convenient. Smart software is eclipsed by artificial intelligence, AI, as Doug was mentioning. I'm going to conclude with some of those thoughts, and I think really what this would have been is Web 3.0. We seem to be stuck with Web 2.0, but artificial intelligence takes this to the next level. Robotics isn't going away anytime soon, but certainly the new emphasis is on robots and bots coming together. We're seeing this in government centers. We're seeing chatbots, and we're seeing the like very much tied to AI. When we look at, the old standard of measuring one's intelligence, we have always looked upon the IQ. All the latest management information and talking to a number of CEOs in the public sector and in the private sector value EQ more so than IQ. So take a look at emotional intelligence, understand it in terms of who you're hiring, and maybe you can learn a little bit more about yourself. That's something that is going to grow, I think, even more so, especially in the technology field. Virtual and augmented reality have really come together. Many companies are referring to these as mixed reality, where they both come together, various overlays, and really cool ways to both train and visualize information, things, and objects. Credit cards, still there, but we're starting to see a rise in take of Bitcoin. It has fluctuated widely over the last 60 days. We shall see, but this idea of cryptocurrency is not going to go away. And when it comes to database transactions, even more so be true with blockchain technology. That is mentioned at the state level as well as the local government level as a very effective alternative to traditional databases in terms of better data integrity and being able to track when changes might be made. Big data for public consumption certainly is being eclipsed by big data for data-driven decision-making. The Internet of Everything needs to be replaced by a secured Internet of Everything. The fears still remain that we have an awful lot of open systems out there that need to be encrypted. Number 15 is relatively new, which is hiring IT staff internally to perhaps managing IT staff externally, where we're seeing across the country more local governments reaching out to the private sector to augment their existing staff patterns with outside help, giving them greater flexibility for particular tasks. Just like at the state level, we're finding it difficult. We hear this all the time with everybody who is retiring or finding work elsewhere at a much higher salary, that we're then forced to sell the benefits of the experience of working for government, quality of life type issues, and some of the antiquated titles, as Doug was talking about, does not help. And it troubles me to think to this day and age how many local governments continue to hold on to classifications and not budging and understanding how you can still have classifications, but you need to have title flexibility to mirror what is the needs of the market as well as the individual. Cloud computing is a term that I think is going to start to go away, being replaced with managed services, because when you have managed services, that really is the bigger change. Who is managing the day-to-day operations, whether it be software or hardware? And I think the newest one to make the list is converged infrastructure to hyper-convergent infrastructure. I won't spend any more time on that, but take a look at it. It is a relatively new offering that allows an awful lot of consolidation, smaller footprint, and a much easier system to maintain and secure. So we did studies, as does NASCIO. We polled county IT officials. We partner with NACO, the National Association of Counties, with that. We did that in December 2017, and we did another study in January this month, 2018, of city. So what I'm going to share with you is the combined city and county snapshot of the year. And when we look at it, we have 11 top areas, and they are ranked. The first, of course, is security and risk management. Number 2, consolidation, optimization. Number 3, cloud services. I'll add the word managed services. Number 4, budget, cost control, fiscal management. Number 5, enterprise IT governance. 6, data management and analytics. 7, there we are, digital government. 8 is shared services. 9, IT staffing. 10, broadband wireless connectivity. And 11 is agile and incremental software delivery. One of the things that I know many of you in the vendor community are interested in is what are we seeing in terms of spend rates for the year 2018. We did that study earlier in 2017, last quarter, and we found that a majority see an increase in IT spend. The second largest category is about the same, and a very small amount envision some kind of decline in spending. We thought it would be interesting, with the benefit of looking at the NASCIO data first, to compare both local government with state government, and what you see in blue after each of the categories I just shared with you, you'll see how the state government stacks up with what our local government folks have been saying. Clearly, security and risk management is number 1. Consolidation optimization is 3, and cloud services 2. So we really share those top 3 spots. Digital government in the local government world is 7, but I think that's just what you call it. I think some people are still enamored to the term e-government and are doing some amazing things. They just haven't called it digital government. And the rest, I think, is self-explanatory. In both cases, agile and incremental software delivery is pretty much at the bottom, but they still have made the cut as being in the top 11 areas of interest. This is not measuring intensity because we have some larger jurisdictions that have spent quite a bit of time and effort in these areas. So that leads me to where we are next. And we are, I think, fascinated by where we believe artificial intelligence may take us. But there's some other things when we talk about workforce. And right now, employment rates look pretty decent overall, despite our problems of classification and or titles for IT professionals. But all sorts of predictions are showing that robots may be taking 50% of our jobs by the year 2050 and already outperforming humans at almost anything. So this is something that could be a real game changer in terms of how we govern, in terms of what will people do if they're replaced. We're going to have a very educated society. Clearly new jobs will be created, as they always are when we have these huge shifts. But this time, the speed of change is happening more rapidly than some people believe that new jobs can possibly be created to capture that. What will we do with our idle time? How will governments collect their tax base? Will we have to, and I've jokingly said this, will governments have to tax robots and come up with productivity taxes because right now our whole system is based on employees and productivity. It really does change things dramatically. So I thought, just for the fun of it, if you've not seen it, there is a great website tool called Will Robots Take My Job? And I've got good news here for most of you on the call. So what you would do is go to Will Robots Take My Job? you're going to enter your job, and it will give you the closest classification to that. I happen to choose chief executives, and notice it says totally safe. It gave a median salary, and it gave a risk factor looking down the years to come. So I think IT, we're safe, but not necessarily for everybody that's in our shop. But if I put in janitorial, suddenly 66%, janitors and cleaners except maitre d's and housekeeping cleaners. But notice what I circled, robots are watching. So it's a very interesting time in looking at how all these things are shaping up. We absolutely have some challenges ahead with artificial intelligence. And like the other day when I received a call from a very cheery voice selling something, I said, "You're not real, are you?" And there was a pause and it said, "No, actually, I'm not." And then I said, "Can I speak to your supervisor?" And the answer was, "Well, how would you know if that person is real or like me?" That just gives you a sense of the intelligence that is built into many of these chatbots, the ability to not just to understand cognitive learning, but to go the next step and put pieces together and actually hold intelligent conversations with us mortals. So it is kind of interesting. When we look at the top policy issues facing government, net neutrality is something that we are watching. The need for privacy continues to be there. The concern over surveillance, there's both the good side and the bad side. Artificial intelligence and all of its ramifications. The move from capital budgets to the operating budget still continues to befuddle people. I know folks at the local level who say, "I can't believe I'm buying this stuff, but I have to because I can't get the wizards who control the purse strings to understand why we should be moving to the cloud and to a different model." IT modernization, local governments are still struggling. Many have not recovered since the Great Recession of 2008, and they're looking at all times to modernize and catch up. Rural broadband, as people continue to migrate into the cities, we cannot forget those in the rural areas, and they're different kind of rural areas. I think more attention will be spent to rural broadband, and the good news is there are funds targeted for that, and there are new technologies that will help that along. And then we have the FirstNet implementation and how localities tie in with the states. A lot of people feel this is not for me, but my answer is yes, you should be involved. This is kind of important. And the idea of autonomous vehicles is certainly daunting as we see a number of major companies committing. Probably this will start on the state highways and state roads, working their way into cities. But those cities and communities that do not invest in the appropriate infrastructure will find a digital bypass sign outside of their neighborhoods. Some may welcome that and not want this. But in terms of economic growth and development, there is a role for local governments. They've got to understand the need for digital infrastructure. These vehicles that are being deployed are not necessarily running totally off of satellite communications. There's need for peer-to-peer communications. They need to be able to negotiate and communicate with infrastructure. And those who ignore this will be left out in the cold. So we're at the point now where I have raced through my presentation, as has Doug, and this is our favorite part, to kind of listen in and respond to questions and comments that you might have. And the way to best do that is to type it into your chat box. There's no way we can unmute the hundreds of people that are there. So please think of the question that you would like to ask either Doug or myself, or just ask the question and then we can decide who can best answer it, if not both of us.
Alan, I think we've got the first question on the board here that I see from Dan was a question around the infrastructure funding and the proposed infrastructure fund from President Trump about we expect a surge in funding. I would not use the word surge. We don't expect a surge in funding. If past history is any indicator, very little of those funds will be directed to digital infrastructure or really any spend in that space. That was certainly the experience with the Recovery Act in 2009, where very, very little of that was actually explicitly directed to digital infrastructure. And so again, I would expect the same thing. Right now the devil's in the details about how that can be used. Or I think there's going to be, rather than a direct infusion of cash like we saw with the Recovery Act, we're probably going to see a mix, including some tax incentives, perhaps some regulatory relief that could result in some savings. But I would, again, from the NASCIO side, look for a couple of opportunities there. One, most likely would be broadband and rural broadband deployment. That continues to be a focus. Last mile is continued to be a big challenge for local governments and for state governments. So there may be some funding there. The other one might be a cyber protection, cyber resilience. Back early in my comments around cyber disruption, states could use some funding in that space. One area, obviously, that states continue to be concerned about is cyber talent. There's been some discussions about increased funding from the federal side. I don't believe that would be included in infrastructure. You know, the shovel-ready term came up during the discussions in 17 about the infrastructure plan, and I just don't know how that's going to fit in to the evolving model in the states, which, again, really aren't investing dollars in new facilities. So we're not seeing any new data centers come online. We're seeing, in fact, if anything, a major constriction of data centers, where states that once had 30 and 40 are moving down to 1 and 2 with a enterprise data center and a backup. So it might, there might be some opportunity for renovations and co-locations, bringing in local governments perhaps. But again, until we see more details, I just don't see a surge in funding being made available to state and local governments from that infrastructure plan.
Okay. I see another question, Doug, and that is, do we expect a surge in spending now that FirstNet is been accepted by all the states where everybody has opted in?
Well, there is a subscriber model there, so I think I think that the transition from the full kind of LMR land mobile analog situation, particularly at the local level, is going to take some time. I think there will be perhaps a surge in the subscriber base for those that can afford to move to move to FirstNet environment. But again, for the foreseeable future, and some predict as long as 10 years, there's going to be basically a dual and perhaps somewhat competing platforms between the existing infrastructure on the voice side and the data side offered by FirstNet. Those that can afford to essentially have both, which means they need to have end-user appliances, need to have those FirstNet capable phones at the end for their data side, or their laptops, or their tablets. I think that's going to be the challenge. The surge is going to come in infrastructure on the AT&T side as the prime. The surge is going to come in that infrastructure deployment for the core, and then, of course, for the RAN, the radio access networks within each state or territory. So that'll be the initial, I think, spend will be in that base infrastructure, and then the state and local governments. And really, this is a local government spend situation. Are they going to be able to handle both their, let's say, their annual or monthly cost to support both the current environment on land mobile radios that they have and push to talk, as well as a digital option, which was not going to provide them those voice capabilities early on. So these are major questions that are going to have to be answered, and it's really a marketplace discussion as well.
Yeah, I see there's a question here for me having to do with the ins and outs, and I used the word credit card in and Bitcoin. Credit card being replaced more by Bitcoin. Yes. Let me clarify. I really meant that generically in terms of cryptocurrency. So that takes into account all sorts of things that are being experimented with, whether it be Apple Pay or Google Wallet or other forms of payment that we will just swipe our devices, whether it's going through a credit card or a cryptocurrency. So it is a more generic thing that I had in mind when I showed that. One question for both of us, Doug, is what surprised us this year? In other words, what was, of all the things that your research showed and my research showed, what 1 or 2 points surprised you the most?
Well, we expect surprises around here. So I think on the, I'll take it 2 things. One, on the CIO leadership side, what surprised certainly me and the community is that in a other than Virginia and New Jersey, in a non-election year essentially across the nation, that we had 15 state CIO transitions. That's a relatively high number. And if you look at just the last 12 months, we've had 8 teens, 3 already in 2018 in January. So through retirements and decisions to move on, that was certainly one of my surprises, that we had such a significant number of state CIO transitions. We would certainly anticipate that during those election cycles, but not in 2017. So that from a standpoint of just our membership, that was a surprise. I think on the just the technology policy front, I think what surprised me is how quickly topics like autonomous and highly connected vehicles and AI have gone from just early discussions into study panels and commissions and councils being established, and some beta testing and proof of concepts going on. I think we've already noticed just in the last month movement in that area, and I think states grabbing onto artificial intelligence as well and looking for opportunities in robotic process operations within their business process and dealing with citizens. So I think that's why we see 18 as a real growth in that area, which I would describe kind of not beyond the hype. We're actually going to see policy discussions, security discussions in both of those areas coming up in 18.
Yeah, I would echo that. My biggest surprise was the rapid speed in the adoption and interest in artificial intelligence and chatbots and this whole idea of digital service delivery. I mean, this was something that was not on our lists, and all of a sudden it has appeared big time, and we have people with, titles like digital officer and programs totally devoted to this to, improve services to internally as well as externally. So to me, like Doug, I've just been amazed. And in fact, I am going to be doing a conference with NACO in March where I will actually be doing an interview with a hologram that is programmed in artificial intelligence. So we haven't even talked about holograms yet, but they're coming in, and there's one of our members is actually positioning this to be the ultimate receptionist in a convention center or a town center or a meeting hall or whatnot. So there's a lot of cool stuff that are happening. But that's the biggest surprise, the rapidness in which this is occurring.
It is, Alan. I think also it's also fairly pragmatic in exploiting the consumer marketplace. As you look at the number of states, and I know we have some locals, but we certainly have had a number of states already that have taken the Amazon Echo platform and Google Home, and they've built applications for that. They're building libraries. They're allowing citizens to access online digital services using their Amazon Echo at home or at work, and I think those are relatively straightforward. And now we have states that are looking at those digital services teams to exploit those opportunities, go out to the agencies and talk about now how they can deliver, whether you want to study for your driver's test, you want to ask about the best fishing locations, you wanted to do an online mentoring program. These are all examples that are currently live today, so no longer hype, but actually being used. And citizens see that as perhaps a more modern state organization, which is something they always get criticized for.
Great. We have a question here about broadband in terms of what is happening at the FCC regarding broadband deployment and the potential impact on state and local government. I'll jump in real quick, and then I'm sure you have something to add on that as well, Doug. But, we haven't used the word 5G in this conversation yet, and it's implied. 5G is coming, although you talk to a couple of different folks, and they have somewhat differing definitions. But one thing is clear. The spectrum in which 5G is going to enter the market is going to be in a very different bandwidth than what we're used to, meaning that to make this system as robust as promised, they're going to have hundreds and maybe even thousands more antenna sites. They'll be microsites. They'll be much smaller, and the distance between any device and to those antennas is going to be much closer. And that's how you get more productivity out of the network. That's going to have some interesting challenges for local government, and already the FCC, not surprising, is trying to preempt any local government from what would normally be, some of the site selection kind of things that they are used to, including zoning and whatnot. These things are very unobtrusive. They're smaller, but it still could be an issue, and just like we've been dealing with franchising rights. Doug, you want to add to that?
Yeah, good answer, Alan. I would agree, and I think you're right. I think in this current administration, with the emphasis on reducing regulations and kind of burdensome activities that prevent marketplace expansion in some areas, that's exactly right. I think they're trying to look to kind of preempt local and state decision making. Things like I said, antenna siting and tower siting. Also things like pole attachment fees and discussions around how to essentially disincentivize those advances by either excessive pole attachments or at least preventing those from being deployed as robustly as perhaps the marketplace would like. And in the 5G space, we're going to see that perhaps take the place of hardline internet services for those that don't need that high capacity direct pipeline to their home, whether it's cable, fiber, that they may be using those in a mobile environment. I mean, that's certainly the plan behind FirstNet. It's a 5G rollout for FirstNet services, and we would also expect at some point, not necessarily in 18, but certainly in the future, there will be excess capacity on FirstNet, and there's already discussions around what other public services, by that I mean state and local legitimate services, perhaps could use the FirstNet bandwidth. And so that's part of the overall plan, is the secondary use of FirstNet beyond prioritization with first responders, because I think everybody recognizes that there will be excess capacity in many areas of the country, and should local and state government official activities be authorized to use FirstNet 5G services. That'll be kind of interesting to see. So, yeah, I think there's going to be a continuing discussion around the broadband capability, both terrestrial and mobile, for both state and local government.
I think we have time for one last question. I have a question here. Where do you see the greatest investments being made specific to the IT workforce? I can say very quickly that the managers that I talk to on a daily basis are looking for talent and flexibility. And this is kind of a change from what has existed in the past, where you're building up strong groups and assuming that they're going to be with you for the next 20 years. Because of millennials entering the workforce, there are different expectations. And so what I see as the number one priority is to provide greater training and certifications. At PTI, we do that. We have CIO certification, and we have digital service professional certification. Tremendous interest there, and the idea of bringing talent in on project-by-project basis. So this whole idea of the independent worker continues to grow throughout the workforce in government, and I think in the private sector. So I think we're going to have a strong need for a core strong leadership and versatility within the organization, and then much of it will be outsourced, and for people on certain projects are brought in, providing that flexibility, and that to me is the most important trend that is different than years past. Doug?
Yes, Alan, thanks. I think, and if you look at, certainly our data and experience of the last couple of years with states, several, I think, trends and themes stand out. One is there's certain activities within state government, like cybersecurity, enterprise architecture, and others, where the states have been somewhat reluctant to bring in outside services or managed services to do that, but I think that is going to change. But again, clearly, if you look at the greatest need in the states, it's around two or three areas. One is cybersecurity talent. We know there's certainly a crisis in that space, and states really want to continue to bring on their own folks, but that may not be possible. So they're going to continue to make investments in that space. The other is, obviously around enterprise architecture, business solutions. We see a growing need in the agile space and agile service delivery, lean methodology. Again, that may not be possible to bring those folks on as full-time state employees, so they may be using supplemental staffing in that area. In terms of the trends that we see, one is certainly around the more flexible both work space and work week, and that's something that, again, millennials have asked for. I think states are starting to respond to that. Many, many examples as I travel around the country, seeing new, modern, innovative workspaces, innovation labs, collegial activities, bullpens for software development, where it's a much different environment than it was just 5 years ago. So we've highlighted some of those in our awards program. We like to recognize those and point out what states are doing. I think the whole approach to the workforce in the future for states is going to be what I would describe as more as talent management and acquisition as opposed to hiring. So the post and pray does not work. You have to begin to cultivate talent in an early spot because the overwhelming majority of those candidates do not perceive state government to be an attractive place to work. So you have to begin early. We've seen that work with internships, getting interns in early, and then some states have developed a very large internship program with their local community colleges and higher education institutions. So I think, again, the futures for the investments are going to be more around talent management and not simply using the traditional HR processes and practices.
Well said. Well, I think we're out of that time, and I want to thank everybody at NASCIO for making this possible. We're using their platform, and as Doug said, go to their website, nascio.org, and you'll see some great publications. Many of the things that he mentioned today are there. This recording, for those who may have come late, will be made available to everybody who is registered, and that includes all the visuals that were part of that within the next 24 hours. I also want to thank the PTI family for the cities and counties of this country for supporting us and allowing us to be part of this, as well as our friends from the National Academy of Public Administration, who also are part of this presentation as a co-sponsor. So I want to thank everybody. Doug, it's always a pleasure. We should do a second one where we just do Q&A because I know there's a lot more questions that we could address, but that would make this a very long call. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Alan. Appreciate it. Always a pleasure. Bye, everyone.